Okay, welcome to the last section. I've labelled it bending vibrato. We've obviously looked at bends a little bit, but I'd like to actually break down the technique that I use to bend strings, and also just have a look at some different vibrato you can add to notes. Obviously, vibrato is one of those signature things you can generally tell great guitarists by. You can generally recognise them, in fact, by their vibrato. People like Paul Kossoff, wonderful vibrato. Angus Young, Yngwie Malmsteen's probably got the best rock vibrato I've ever heard. But he does use eighths, baby strings, and he's obviously got quite a bit of weight behind his behind his notes as well. Okay, so let's just have a look at the technique that I use for bending a string. Let's start off with the B flat. And just going to bend the B flat up to C. Now, things you don't want to do. I can give you a small list of things you don't want to do. You don't want to bend with the fingers. In other words, you don't want to kind of try and use your fingers to actually physically bend the string because they're not strong enough. There's tiny little muscles in there, and they're not really strong enough to get any kind of any sort of power or control with. So you don't want to bend with the fingers. You don't want to raise your shoulder when you bend. You don't want to throw your elbow out, all these little things that I see guitarists doing. The way that I'm doing it is I'm actually pivoting on the side of the hand, as high up the hand as you possibly can. So in other words, you might be playing this note here, but the side of the hand probably wants to be back. You know, in my case, I'm around the 7th fret at the moment. So I'm actually pivoting just underneath that joint there. And you grip with the thumb, and so once your fingers are on that particular note, all the fingers are locked into position, and then the actual bending motion all comes from the forearm. Okay, this huge muscle here wasn't huge, obviously, but it's bigger than the little muscles you get in your fingers. So it's almost like opening kind of a door handle kind of effect. That's probably the best analogy I could use. You know, if you open a door, you're obviously using your forearm. If you tried to use your fingers to open it, it would be a lot more difficult, and you wouldn't have so much control. So pivot as high up the hand as possible. Anchor with the thumb. You might even just want to practice that motion. The wrist doesn't bend. Don't kind of bend the wrist. The wrist is locked in position again. So it's all literally just coming from the forearm. And that just gives you a whole, load of control and strength that you wouldn't normally have for string bending. So once you get used to that motion, try and grab a string and try and do the same thing. So B flat to C. So you can see there's no kind of the joints on the fingers aren't moving at all. It's all literally coming from the forearm. So you probably notice when I bend, I'm actually sort of normally round about this position for playing guitar. But as soon as I bend, I tend to kind of get the hand around a bit further and grip a little tighter with the thumb. So that's the anchor, that's the pivot. And you have all that kind of strength from the forearm to actually push the strings up. As I said, I use 11s. I'm not going to get mistaken for Arnold Schwarzenegger walking down the street. Obviously, I'm not particularly muscly, but when you use the right leverage or leverage, if you're in America, it's a whole bunch easier. So. Bends like that, which would normally be quite difficult, bending up a minor third on the A string, bending up from the G to the B flat. You can actually bend that quite easily, but also not only bend it in tune, but also add vibrato to it as well. Vibrato is obviously a very personal choice, but there are a few important factors to think about. Good vibrato is always in time with the track in some way. In other words, if the track's kind of got that sort of rhythm, then the vibrato might be going da, 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 da. Or if you want something a bit more, a bit slower, more emotive, it might be going da, 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 triplets against it. But it's always in time with the music. If you listen to great classical violinists, the vibrato is always perfectly in time with the music, and that's makes it sit better and it makes it sound nicer. Also even as well. That's another important factor with it. It needs to be, if you saw it on a graph, it would be very kind of, it's not going kind of, it's not doing this kind of, it's not doing that kind of thing. I mean, some guitarists like that kind of fast, really tiny things. I don't tend to go for that one much, but again, it's a personal preference. If it was me, I'd recommend that you listen to people like Brian May, people like Angus Young, people like Paul Kossoff, people like Yngwie Malmsteen. They've all got fantastic vibrato, and it really makes everything they play sound exciting. I mean, Angus Young's simple stuff, but such a great vibrato. It just adds a kind of adds something that you can't get any other way. And generally, their vibrato is generally a tone wide. What I mean by that is if you're bending up from the B flat to the C, the vibrato, when you slow it down, it's actually going to be going all the way back down to pitch and then back up again. So you might have to practice. I know this sounds very cold and artificial and stuff, but great vibrato is not necessarily something you're born with. You can practice it the same way as rhythm playing or chord melody or whatever, So it might be that you just need to put the metronome on and go, and then speed it up a little before you can actually do it, and it's effective. So that's kind of what you do for bent notes. The vibrato is obviously underneath because you bring the note back down again. For straight notes, in other words, notes that aren't bent, the vibrato has to be on top because you can't bend it lower because you're just playing a straight note. Obviously, this is this is obvious stuff. So okay. And you'll probably notice the vibrato again is a tone wide, or as near as you can be bothered with. It's a very rock kind of vibrato, I guess, the tone thing. Blues players tend to generally will use the slightly smaller one, but if you practice the big one, then doing the smaller ones where, in other words, ones where it doesn't go tone wide. I've kind of found that it's nice sometimes to bring it in. In other words, so you're not bringing the vibrato in straight away. So you play the note. I kind of like, that's one of my personal favourites, I guess. Just adding the vibrato slightly later, just to, I don't know, just it's something that I like to do. I do it when I'm singing as well. Sometimes I'll sing a note and then bring the vibrato in afterwards. But again, you should be able to do it most ways. In other words, put the vibrato on as soon as you play the note. As far as which way to bend the strings, the top four bend up, and the bottom four I bend down. When I mean down towards the ground. And as I said, the top four go up. So in other words, the two middle ones will go. You can bend them up or down depending on the phrase that you're playing. If you're going to play something like that naturally wants to go up, you wouldn't really want to, because you're sort of bending it into the B string, and then you want to play the B string. So that's kind of your own personal choice, really. But okay, so there you have it, a couple of different different ways of doing vibrato, the sort of more aggressive tone wide, or the slightly bluesier. Again, they're not going all the way back down to pitch, you just... I suppose it's a semitone, really. The other way is the more kind of classical way, which is it does work. It's not great on electric guitar. It works better on sort of you see classical guitarists doing it because they're using nylon strings. It's kind of easier, but that's kind of more of a sideways approach. What you're essentially trying to do is trying to pull the string that way and then trying to pull it that way. So it looks a little like this. It's not one I use very often, but it's a... Seems to work quite well with the violining thing that we did earlier. Really nice subtle vibrato. So that's the three basic types, I guess: aggressive, mild, or really soft and lyrical. Depends on the musical setting. Depends on what mood you're in, I guess. You could go a bit wacky and go for the more Zakk Wylde kind of minor third vibrato, but that always sounds a bit bizarre to me. But I mean, it might be what you're going for. In which case, you definitely need to adopt this kind of hand position, so you get enough strength to bend the strings comfortably. And I'm gonna play out now, do some slightly different vibrato on the final backing track. Hopefully this has given you some ideas on how to play more emotionally, you know, or if you're not feeling it, then you can kind of fake it by by playing slightly ahead of the beat, slightly behind. And the other thing that I haven't mentioned, probably the most important thing to convince the audience that you're playing with Phil, is you've got to pull those faces. You've got to pull those really distorted kind of B.B. King, Gary Moore, Angus kind of pained expressions, and then the audience will be conned into the... No, I'm joking. But it doesn't hurt. It really doesn't hurt, actually, in a way. Okay, so I'm gonna play along with the backing track just to try and give you an idea of how some of these different vibratos sound.